A political showdown in South Korea. President Yoon Suk Yeol is under pressure to resign after his failed attempt to impose martial law. Opposition MPs have served a notice to impeach him. How will the country weather this test of its democracy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Neave. During the past 4 decades, South Korea has come far from years of dictatorships to become a thriving modern democracy. That reputation faced a serious threat on Tuesday night when President Yoon Suk Yeol shocked the nation and much of the world by declaring martial law. He was forced to withdraw his decree hours later after it was overwhelmingly rejected by members of parliament. President Yoon now faces an impeachment motion and is under pressure to step down, both from his own party and trade unions. What prompted the South Korean leader to take this step that's being called anti-constitutional and an act of rebellion? And how will the Asian economic powerhouse deal with this extraordinary challenge to its democracy? We'll deal with all of these questions in a bit, but first, this report by Mohammed Haji.
A country in the grip of a political crisis. South Korea's decades-old democracy put to the test as President Yoon Suk Yeol placed the country under martial law on Tuesday night, the first time one has been imposed in more than 45 years. He accused the main opposition party of sympathizing with North Korea and taking part in what he described as anti-state activities. But the president was forced to reverse his decision only hours later after politicians defied soldiers and forced their way into parliament to vote against the move.
After the National Assembly's demand to lift martial law troops have been withdrawn. I will accept the National Assembly's demand and lift martial law through a cabinet meeting.
The decision caused both anxiety and confusion among South Koreans.
I thought this was a joke. Then it turned out to be true that he had declared martial law. I got so worried.
In the morning, South Korea's largest labor union called a general strike, calling Yoon Suk Yeol authoritarian and demanding he step down.
I speak on behalf of all the farmers. Yoon Suk Yeol's regime is even more dangerous than climate change. We cannot turn a blind eye to President Yoon any longer.
After plunging his country into turmoil, Yoon's future is now hanging in the balance. He won the presidency in 2022 by the closest margin in South Korea's democratic history, despite his background as a public prosecutor who wanted to crack down on corruption. He has suffered very low approval ratings, following a series of scandals, and with his wife accused of corruption. In January, he scrapped a bill that would have ordered her to be investigated over accusations of manipulating stocks. In July, she was questioned after accepting a Dior handbag as a gift in violation of South Korea's anti-corruption laws. And in October, media leaked a phone call of the founder of a polling agency who boasted of his influence over the president's choice of candidates in by-elections held in 2022. Yoon has also struggled to push his agendas through an opposition-controlled parliament.
Yoon has had a tough presidency, and President Yoon has had a difficult presidency insofar as the opposition party has the majority in the legislature, and they have been fighting him sort of tooth and nail.
The main opposition party says it will now push for Yoon to be impeached and will file treason charges against him, and that would further jeopardize the president's already questionable future. Mohammed Haji, Aljazeera, for Inside Story.
OK, let's bring in our guests. In Washington, D.C., Natalia Slavney is the assistant editor at the Korea program of the Stimson Center think tank. In Seoul, B.J. Kim is a professor of international studies at Hankook University and a former South Korean diplomat. And also in D.C., Darcy Drat-Vihares, a fellow of Korean studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Hello to all three of you. A very warm welcome to Inside Story. B.J., I'm going to put a question to you that perhaps only one man in Korea really knows the answer to at the moment, and it is the president himself. What do you think President Yoon was thinking when he declared martial law without even the backing of his own political party?
That question still remains as the biggest puzzle in the minds of Koreans, ordinary Korean citizens, as well as the analysts. So we do not have a clear answer to that. There are different kind of speculations, but we do not have a clear picture on that. What I can say is, judging from what we're hearing in his announcement of the martial law, he was talking about all these political attacks that was continuously being waged by the opposition party that controls the legislature, National Assembly, on all fronts, continuously issuing impeachments of prosecutors as well as judges that are trying the alleged crimes of the opposition leader, and also, impeaching some of the important members of the top level leaders of the governments, as well as rejecting most of his major policy initiatives that he suggested to be, put into law, and then killing most of the major items in the budget for next year. So he was going over all this list of political attacks being waged by the opposition leaders. So that's one factor for sure. And in addition, as your reporter mentioned, the attacks on the first lady herself, about the allegations about the stock money manipulation, accepting of a luxury bag, and other kinds of contacts with the political spin doctors, that must have played a role in terms of on the side of his personal, the emotional side of it as well. So there were lists of things that might have caused his what we now think is miscalculation, where we do not actually see clear kind of end game, the image of his end game, or a clear scenario that he was trying to accomplish. We're not sure about it, but
we'll talk about end games as the conversation continues. But Darcy, let's talk about some of the specific wording of this declaration of martial law, because President Yoon said that he was, quote, rooting out anti-state forces guilty of plotting sedition, seemingly on behalf of North Korea. Who was he trying to convince here, Darcy? And was there any audience in Korea that was willing to listen to a message like that, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really puzzling message, given it does seem a bit out of step with what the contemporary political culture looks like in South Korea. The language that was used, this anti-North Korea or anti-state forces, or pro-North Korea anti-state forces that he's talking about, really harks back to an earlier day in the 20th century when Korea was under martial law. During the military dictatorship in the 1960s, 70s, and then 80s, this sort of language was really what was used by the military dictators, first Park Chung-hee and then Chun Doo-won, to justify their tight control of society and implement some very heavy surveillance across the country. But this seems really out of step with 2024, where the country has really looked beyond the peninsula in its daily political life. It's really a much more global country. And so using this language really is, the target audience is probably a very small segment of right or older Koreans that this would resonate with. But by and large, what we're hearing from South Korea right now is this feels like cover for what was really a political action.
Language from a past era, almost, Natalia, says Darcy. Can you give us a sense, though, of the latent tensions that exist between the ruling party and the opposition at the moment, Natalia?
Yeah, so we've seen a tumultuous few years in office from Yoon Suk Yeol. He's been accused and associated with multiple different reports of nepotism, bribery, corruption, and abuse of power overall. So as BJ said earlier, the opposition party is really fighting him kind of tooth and nail at every turn. And in the legislative election back in April kind of solidified his status as a lame duck when the opposition party won in an overwhelming majority, kind of hampering moving forward with any of his domestic or foreign policy agendas, where he was coming closer to China and trying to really solidify Korea's status as a geopolitical player, especially in trilateral relations with the US and Japan.
And turning to you, BJ, again, because you mentioned some of the personal issues that may have cast a shadow or may have influenced this decision to introduce martial law. Let me refer to some of them. I mean, his wife, as we heard in the earlier report, the First Lady Kim Keon-hee was at the centre of this scandal over her love, apparently, of expensive handbags. She allegedly plagiarised her PhD thesis as well, so much so that some of the tabloids have even nicknamed her Kim Keon-hee Risk. Do these personal problems really play a role in doing something so dramatic as marshalling the armed forces of the country, BJ?
Well, as a person, as a natural person, President Yoon might have felt that way because it was a very personal attack on his only family member. They don't have children, so it's just his wife himself, and his wife has been alongside with him throughout his career. And well, they got married at a later age, but since their marriage, she's been, together with him very tightly. And on his way to the presidency, she was his most trusted advisor, if you will. So all these political attacks against her, whether they are true or not, must have been played a big role in terms of impacting him, in terms of causing anger and personal grievance against this, opposition that was raising these issues. And I think that's kind of understandable in a way.
Darcy, your views on that?
I think that Yoon is feeling a lot of pressure. As was mentioned in the piece up top, there was the recent stalemate, deadlock over the budget issue happening in National Assembly. I think he took that was really frustrated by that. This year, we've seen medical protests by doctors over his decision to raise entry for doctors. There's a really severe healthcare shortage. Certainly, things like housing, labor, these are things that have been really stressful issues for both the country and him. And certainly, as BJ just mentioned, your only direct family member is a pretty personal attack. So I think that this is just a mounting pressure against the president, and he reacted in a way that just feels out of touch with what were the tools at his disposal as president of this robust democracy.
And the way he has acted has set off a chain of repercussions since then, Natalia, because several cabinet members, including the defence minister, have offered their resignations. I stress at the time of recording, the president, though, doesn't appear to be going anywhere. Natalia, do you think this political bloodletting has diffused any tension at all around the president's future?
Unfortunately, I don't think it has. I think the Korean public has made it clear how they feel about this move by imposing martial law, because as you said at the top, his reasons for going forward with it are kind of exaggerated. North Korea already has a national security law in place that bans pro-North Korean activities, which is already pretty controversial. Some of the specific articles have gone back to the National Assembly for review for unfairly targeting civil society organizations, especially those that focus on the North Korean human rights sphere, and being used as a tool even to intimidate people and prevent them from speaking more candidly or criticizing this inter-Korean policy on North Korea. So while we've had mass resignations, I'm not sure that it will assuage the public at all.
BJ, I wonder if you can help us understand who takes over if the president is ousted or indeed resigns before that.
Well, we have this case before 6 years ago when President Park Geun-hye was impeached. At that time, the Prime Minister, Mr. Hwang, took over as the acting president, and he presided over the government for the next 5 months' time until President Moon Jae-in was elected as the new president. So that pathway is quite clear. We have a clear precedent.
Right, and what is also clear is that whatever the president intended, Darcy, appears to have catastrophically backfired. I mean, where he attempted to demonise the political left, it's actually united some members of his own Conservative Party, the People Power Party, with about 190 lawmakers from 6 opposition parties who now all want to see him impeached. What do you see as being the likely next step, Darcy?
Yeah, I think this is why it's so baffling, is that there wasn't really a clear pathway for him to carry this out. Given the law, the procedure of declaring martial law and it requiring National Assembly approval, he doesn't have the votes in the National Assembly. The opposition party has the majority votes. And he also was facing a lot of conflict within his own party, particularly with the party chair, the party leader. So the number of votes that you mentioned included not only the opposition party, there's 190, but it also included, I think, about 18 members of his own party voting to overturn his declaration of martial law. Looking forward, what this means is that it basically backfired, like as you mentioned. So now the opposition party had called for his resignation yesterday at Seoul time. They have put forward a motion to impeach him. He has 48 hours to resign, but it seems like there will be a vote by Friday to impeach him. And I think right now he's basically garnered the support that his opposition needed to seek the impeachment that they had been trying over the past year. So that's what makes this really a particularly baffling move, and maybe suggests his isolation from the general political community in South Korea.
So baffling, but no doubt, particularly BJ in Seoul, where you are, very alarming to see helicopters flying above the presidential palace. I mean, bringing back, no doubt, echoes of the past. I mean, democracy has been hard won in Korea, hasn't it? After decades of military dictatorship, the last time martial law was introduced was back in 1979. Give us a sense of what the mood, the anticipation, the fears were where you are.
The thing is, while he was announcing the martial law, I was watching the TV, and I had chat messages coming into my mobile phones. And overall reaction from my students and my friends overall was kind of like a laughing stance. Like, what is it trying to do in this country where people power has ruled above and beyond the law actually itself? We have this tradition for several decades where people rose up and kicked out the dictators one after another. And it was as recent as 6 years ago when people actually pushed out the sitting president out of her office. And this long, proud tradition of people exercising their own power and having strong, exceptional sense of ownership of the country, it was just unimaginable and unthinkable what the president was trying to do by imposing martial law single-handedly at that time, last night. So that was the overall reaction. And just remember, his martial law remained in actual effect only for about 2.5 hours. While he was making this announcement, 1,000, 2,000, I'm not sure exactly the number of people, but they ran to the National Assembly to protest, and then they were letting the lawmakers into the National Assembly in order to have the lawmakers vote against the martial law.
Right. So a real stress test of the health of democracy there. A real stress test of the health of democracy in the country, clearly. I wonder if we can talk about the international ramifications. Clearly, people power appears to have won the day on the streets of Seoul. But we've had comments from the likes of Russia, China, Japan, the United States, the head of NATO, all of them saying pretty much exactly the same thing, that they're watching developments with, quote, great concern. Natalia, what does this test of democracy in Korea mean for its international standing? Of course, Korea is very much part of the fabric of everyday life for millions of people around the world, from Korean cars to K-pop. What does this mean, though, for Korea's international reputation?
Well, certainly South Korea has definitely, as you said, entrenched itself in the fabric of the global community. And I think people in D.C. especially were kind of shocked at the response from the United States. I think most thought that it would be a stronger condemnation of imposing martial law, especially because in all of these buildups of trilateral relations with the U.S. and Japan, South Korea has promoted itself as a global responsible power with a strong sense of democracy, a strong history of democracy. So I think the global community is a bit shocked and just trying to figure out what the next steps are for South Korea and what that means for international relations writ large. South Korea has a lot of hands in a lot of different pots. So it will be interesting to see if any countries come forward with stronger statements or if they will focus on kind of rebuilding the party and moving forward with more democratic procedures.
Darcy, I mean, what about international security? I mean, the US have quite a sizable military presence in Korea, don't they? I understand around 24,000 troops, 9 major bases. Do you think this is likely to prompt a security reevaluation from the US?
I don't think that the alliance is in any jeopardy from this. I would actually go a little step further from Natalia and say, I think in Washington, we were a bit dismayed by the Biden administration's reaction to this. And this is something that's been a bit confusing for us in Washington. Who do watch Korea closely, Yoon has domestically implemented some policies that were anti-labor or suppressing some media dissent. And so for us sitting in Washington, D.C., for this to be our partner, there is a bit of mismatch here. That being said, I do think that us in Washington and those who do work on the alliance are very heartened by the fact that this was resolved in, as Professor Kim said, just a few hours. And I think that showing the strength of Korea's robust institutions to keep this sort of overreach in check just goes to show that we are in good hands when we think about our security architecture in the region. It's not in jeopardy from a strong man in Seoul trying to overstep. And so I don't think that this is necessarily going to be affecting the broad strokes of our alliance.
So resolved in a few hours, but nevertheless, it seems to have caused a significant amount of jitters in Korea itself, BJ. I mean, the trade unions clearly worried about all of this. They've launched this indefinite strike until President Yoon goes, and stock futures tumbled. Obviously, markets don't like anything like this. I mean, how do you evaluate the economic damage in Korea at the moment?
Economic damage, I cannot think of any scenario where this will have a real significant impact on the economy, other than perhaps, as you mentioned, the financial market reactions last night, especially the foreign exchange side. We saw a significant weakening of Korean currency for some time. But overall, industry and the business overall, we cannot think of any scenario. Other than that, the possibility of the opposition party, well, not possibility, almost certainly the opposition Democratic Party would probably lead the overall direction of the economic policy going forward. The thing is, opposition party is a progressive party, but that's the party that was the party that belonged to, that had previous President Moon and Moon government's party. And at that time, 2.5 years ago, Moon government was not known as an unfriendly party towards the business. They were doing a lot of business-friendly stuff. So even though the opposition party, Democratic Party, will even further increase their hands over economic policy going forward, that's not a bad news. That's not necessarily a bad news for the business as a whole. So economic business, I don't see significant impact, as I said.
So all of this potentially a gift horse for the opposition. But Natalia, is this also, in some kind of way, a gift horse for North Korea? I guess we could do an entire program on that. But your thoughts, Natalia?
Well, we've seen that North Korea has been pretty silent on the issue. And I think this just shows that they were willing to sit back and let it play out as it was. I think that they felt it was embarrassing for Yoon Suk Yeol, but we also know that people that come out in North Korea and speak, such as Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, they never have anything kind to say about what's going on in South Korea or the US or Japan, or anybody who's working against what North Korea is doing in the international community. So we're not really surprised to see that they're silent. But in terms of inter-Korean relations, I think we're going to stay the course. I don't see any major policy shifts in the weeks coming, no matter who comes into power after Yoon.
Darcy, as we round off this conversation, let me put this to you. Is this all likely to mean a period of more political uncertainty to come in Korea?
Well, I certainly think that we can expect continuation of the wide-scale protests that are going on in South Korea. I mean, as a legacy of its democratization movement in the 80s, it still has a vibrant protest culture, a nonviolent protest culture. So I think that we can look for that. Certainly now with the large umbrella Korea Trade Union, the KTCU, we should look for them, especially if they're calling for a large-scale strike. That's going to be affecting a lot of the industries. And so that's another thing that we can look at And then finally, as the impeachment, whether President Yoon decides to resign or impeachment proceedings go forward, there's going to be a lot of digging for political dirt.
All right, let's circle back and give BJ the last word. Very briefly, BJ, when the dust settles on all of this, will there be some soul searching about how to safeguard even further the health and stability of Korea's democracy? Very briefly, if you would.
Yeah, that's a great question. But once again, I think what we have learned so far is, once again, the people power of this country, which is very unique around the world in comparison with other countries. And people's sense of ownership of the country itself was shown once again. So soul searching, yes, to make it stronger, definitely. But I think we have gained confidence once again in the aftermath of this big political turmoil and big surprise as well.
So no flaws in the existing democratic guardrails, BJ?
As long as people power sits on the top of law and beyond, above and beyond law, I think that's something we can trust in. Democracy, ruled by the people.
Trusted democracy, ruled by the people. We have reached the end of our conversation. A pleasure to have all three of you on this show on Inside Story, BJ Kim, Darcy Drat-Vahares and Natalia Slavney. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Neave Barker, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.